What's up, y'all? I hope everybody had a good Thanksgiving. I got a great question from a reader over the weekend asking, how should I max out? And this is a great question because there's no one right answer. There is a wrong answer. The wrong answer is to walk into the gym whenever I feel like it and do whatever I feel like it and try to hit a new 1 rep max attempt. That's a great way for failure. That's a great way to maybe get hurt, but it's not great for much else. Very, very important to have a plan. And yet I see a lot of guys in the gym who go in without any type of plan at all. They're like, feel like maxing out? I'm going to take some heavy attempts and then try and hit a new 1 rep max. And that is a really, really bad idea. So I'm going to tell you today how I like to structure my 1 rep max attempts and what general recommendations I give clients. This is not the one right way, so if you have another way you prefer, if your coach has a different way, that's perfectly fine. As long as that way isn't wing it, you're good to go. So, first question, when do you max out? In my opinion, if you're a competitive strength athlete, and I'm talking about powerlifting, strongman, bodybuilding maybe even, I don't know anything about Oli, but if you're a competitive strength athlete, you should never max in the gym. There's just no point. It's an exercise on your ego, but otherwise you should know your body well enough and you should have enough of a competition schedule that there's just no point in maxing out. You do need to go heavy, obviously, don't get me wrong. I'm a big fan of heavy singles, doubles, and triples in training. It's just that you don't want to take a true 1 rep max attempt in the gym. Now, there are some exceptions to that, of course. If you have a competition that's maybe more than 6 months out, it might be useful to see, okay, where are we at kind of like the halfway point. So if you're not a competitive strength athlete, I think that you should be maxing out roughly 2 to 3 times a year. That's enough time for you to have a good full macro cycle. So if you think back to our programming video from earlier on, you have time to rest up, you have time for a full off season, you have time for a full peaking program, and then you can take a 1 rep max attempt, and then you can repeat that 2 to 3 times throughout the course of the year, and you still have enough of a time schedule so that you can structure your training really effectively. More than 2 to 3 times a year, not a good call. I think that if you're doing more than 2 to 3 times a year, you're just going to overexhaust yourself. You're not going to be hitting big PRs every time. And to me, training 3 months to hit a 5-pound PR, that kind of sucks, right? I would much rather train 6 months and hit a 20-pound PR. Even though, it's not a huge difference, 10 pounds over 6 months versus 20 pounds, it feels like a lot more. It's a lot more satisfying. Plus, there's lower risk of injury. Now, you can max out less than this. If you never want to max out, I have no issues with that. I think that's a great way to continue to get stronger and focus on your general goals, which is what most people have if they're not competitive athletes. So 2 to 3 times a year max. Next thing to consider is how is your training. So I already touched on kind of the macro cycle. Very, very bad idea to say, well, I've been hitting sets 8 to 12 and it's kind of boring doing these low reps or doing this low weight and these high reps all the time, so let me just max out. Terrible idea. You need to structure your program using some form of periodization so that you start with high volume and low intensity and you work down to low volume and high intensity. And you need to be training in the 90+% range for at least a couple of weeks, preferably 4 to 6 weeks, but at least a couple of weeks before you attempt a 1 rep max. That's going to do 2 things. The most important one is that it's going to give your body some time to adjust to the feeling of heavier loads, your body and your mind. Because if you don't do that, then it's a big shock when you suddenly step under a weight that's your max or even more than your max. And so if you're not physically and mentally prepared for that, you're in trouble. The second thing, which is almost just as important, is that time in training, over 90% of your 1 rep max, that gives you more practice grinding with heavy weights. When most people's technique breaks down, it happens somewhere in the 85 to 95% range, roughly. The more you train in that range, the more practice you get, the better you'll be able to hold your technique for a 1 rep max attempt. And holding technique in a 1 rep max is extremely important. I'm going to repeat this over and over because otherwise you're going to miss and you might get hurt. So very, very important that you have that technique dialed in even at higher percentages. The other thing to consider, so if you're a competitive athlete and you've signed up for a meet, I think you should do that meet unless you get hurt or unless you have some extenuating life circumstance where it's like, look, I have other priorities other than my life as a competitive athlete, and these are more important right now. If those are the case, you get hurt or something like that happens, drop the meet. The meet's not the end of the world, all right? Don't get so hung up on it that you have to do this meet. That said, if it's not one of those 2 things, and you're just like, well, my training's going shit, do the meet anyway. I don't like to admit this, but the truth is, your training leading up to the meet It's not a big deal as some people make it out to be, as long as you've structured it correctly. If you've had kind of bad days in the gym and you're feeling really run down and stuff, that's normal. And on top of that, you might still go to the meet and show up and fucking crush it and have your best day ever. And conversely, you could feel like your training is on point, you're having the best cycle ever, you're going to destroy this meet, and then you go in and have a bad day and you feel like all that work was wasted. And it's not true, it's just that you happen to show up this day and have a bad day. So don't necessarily gauge whether or not you're going to do the meet based on how your training is leading up to it. That's if you're a competitive athlete. If you're not, and you're feeling like training's kind of meh, there's no reason to attempt a 1 rep max. Save it for another time. All that work you did during your training cycle, this is what I just said for competitive athletes, all that work you just did for your training cycle, you benefited enormously from that. Your 1 rep max test, you're not really building much strength there, maybe a little bit, but most of your strength is built during the training cycle, and then you're just demonstrating that when you go to attempt the 1 rep max. So if you don't have a meet and you were planning on maxing out that day and you feel like shit, push it off. Push it off a couple weeks and keep with that prep. Or, hey, skip the 1 rep max test and do a whole nother off season. It's not a big deal. You should be able to gauge your increase in strength by some of your lifts leading up to the meet. So maybe you hit a PR double or a PR triple, and you can extrapolate pretty well from that. Okay, how's my strength increase from the last time I did a true 1 rep max attempt? All right. Let's say that you've decided, however, that your training's on point more or less, and you're feeling good, and you've structured everything properly, and it's the right time, and you're going to attempt a 1 rep max. So you actually go to the gym, and you have to decide what to do. This is very, very important because you've done all this hard work, you want it to pay off, you need to make sure that the individual training session is structured appropriately. The first step comes with warming up. When I say warming up, I mean a general warm-up. I like to leave, when I'm testing for a 1 rep max, I like to leave a lot of time to warm up. Usually I'll walk in the gym, I'll do some light cardiovascular activity, maybe some dynamic stretching, and I'll get started. This takes maybe 10 to 15 minutes. If I'm going to attempt a 1 rep max, I like 30 to 45 minutes, right? 2 to 3 times as much time to let my body relax, to unwind, to kind of get warmed up, get some blood flowing, get some sweat going, make sure that I'm mentally in the right state. I might even do a couple minutes of meditation. All these things really, really help to get me in the right mindset. Not too amped up, but also not too sleepy or drowsy or dragging, okay? Very, very important you do some type of warm-up like that. I don't really think it matters what you do something you're comfortable with, but make sure that you devote that time to preparing your body for this heavy attempt. Then, once you start warming up with the barbell on whatever lift you're going to attempt, it's very important that you don't jump up too much too fast. So this is going to vary depending on how strong you are, but a good rule of thumb is that when you're working up to roughly 75% range, maybe 65 to 75% range, you're doing so in 10% jumps. So maybe you start with the bar, and then you go up in 10% of your 1 rep max. So if your max is 400, then you're going up the bar, then you're going to do 85, then you're going to do so on and so on, 10% jumps, 40-pound jumps, until you get roughly the 75% range. I don't think you need to stay strictly to that. There's really no reason you can't do bar, 135, 225, and then start jumping 10%. But it's a good rule of thumb to have. Once you get into that 75% range, you want to cut back into more or less 5% jumps. So again, in our 400-pound example, you're jumping up about 20 pounds, between 75 and roughly 85% of your 1 rep max. So another couple sets that are lighter, smaller increments. Again, that's just giving your body more time to adjust to the heavier loads. Very, very important. When you're doing these warm-up sets, you need to take a little bit longer than you normally would in between warm-up sets for just a regular set at the gym. So for me, if I'm going 135, 225, 315, whatever, I don't rest in between those. I put the next plate on and then just go. It's fairly light and I don't really need to. If I'm warming up for a 1 rep max attempt, I'm still going to take 3 to 5 minutes between those sets. I still want to stay warm, right? So I'm going to make sure that I have a hoodie or sweatpants if I need it, and I'm still going to move around a little bit. I'm not just going to sit on the floor. But I'm giving myself plenty of time in between those attempts just to make sure if anything feels a little bit off, I have time to, maybe I need to do a couple more sets of body weight squats, or maybe I need to activate my glutes a little bit better. I want to make sure that I have that time and I don't feel rushed. So once you've gotten up to roughly the 85% range, then you really need to dial things in. This is where you're picking what would be your attempts if you were to do a meet. So I really think it's useful to structure your 1 rep max attempts in the gym just like you were doing a meet, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. So you want to start with something that's fairly easy, but at the same time also pretty mentally challenging. This is something roughly in the 89 to maybe 92, 93% range that would be your opener if you were doing a meet. Okay, it should be something you can do for a fairly easy triple, maybe a moderate triple. And you want to make this attempt, you want to treat this like it was your 1 rep max attempt. Ideally, you treat all your warm-ups like that, but that's pretty mentally draining. Once you've got to this point, you're thinking 1 rep max, you're in 1 rep max mode. So you hit 89 to 92%, hopefully that's really fast, hopefully you feel really confident. And if so, you take your second attempt somewhere around 96 to 98% of your 1 rep max. I like 97 for me. And this is kind of like your warm up right before you hit this new PR. So again, really have to be dialed in. If this opener doesn't feel that great, take a smaller jump. So right, you did 89 to 92, 93, maybe you do 94, 95% for your second, all right? This is why it's very important to schedule plenty of time when you're doing this, because you need to be able to adjust when the time comes if necessary. So you take your second, again, hopefully it's super fast. If it's not, you might want another intermediate attempt, right? So maybe you end up doing something like 89, 93, then 97. And maybe that's kind of exhausting, but hey, that's okay. Your goal today is to hit this PR. Whatever the case may be, when you take the PR, it needs to be a small PR. There's no sense in going for a giant PR all at once if you're training in the gym, all right? I'm a big fan of just chipping whatever your PR is. If your PR is 400 pounds, maybe go for 4 or 5, especially because that's 4 plates, right? That's pretty awesome. If your PR is 475, maybe go for 480. The thing is, when you're doing this in the gym, you have pretty much unlimited time, unlimited resources, right, to keep going. And I absolutely think that if you take this PR and it's not a true 1 rep max, you think, hey, I have a little bit more left in the tank, take it. You've planned for this, you've trained for this, go ahead and take it. Keep going up in 5 to 10 pound jumps until you feel like, okay, that was an actual 1 rep max attempt, or you miss a weight. I think this is a very, very, very useful way to max out because you get a lot more practice training in that very high percent range, keeping good technique. You get a lot more ability to gauge your own work capacity at these higher loads, which is very, very hard to gauge. Even if you're able to crank out sets of 8 to 12 all day, you might really struggle taking one rep, close to a 1 rep max attempt over and over and over again. And that's very important knowledge to have when you then schedule your next training block. And the third thing is you can hit bigger PRs, right? There's no sense in just taking a 5 pound PR and then stopping there if you have a lot more in the tank. Conversely, if you don't have any more in the tank, that was a true 1 rep max, hey, maybe it's not what you wanted, but you got something really productive out of this training session, mentally and physically. Now, I touched a little bit before on how to schedule, give yourself plenty of time for this. I also think it's important to think about how you're going to test the individual lifts. Again, I'm a powerlifter, most of my clients are powerlifters, and so I try and schedule a test day where you're testing all 3 lifts at the same time, right? So you'll do squat, bench press, deadlift, and you're probably going to be there 4 to 6 hours minimum, right? This is kind of like a mock meet in the gym. Whether you're doing it with other people or yourself, it's really useful if you do plan on competing at some point in the future. If that's not your goal, what I hear from a lot of people is, hey, I'm really exhausted after squatting, I don't want to bench and deadlift. Or, squat really tires me out for deadlift, or I just don't have 4 to 6 hours to spend at the gym, whatever the case may be. That's totally fine. You can schedule things so that you're not testing all the lifts in one day. And here's how I recommend to do that. I think that when you're maxing out for the squat or the deadlift, it's very, very demanding, it's very, very exhausting. And if you try and max out for another lift, maybe 48 hours after that, you're probably going to still be really tired, even if it's an upper body lift. Squatting and deadlifting heavy can still detract from your performance on that lift. So I think after you squat and deadlift, you need 2 full days of rest before you attempt another 1 rep max. So that means if you squat and or deadlift on Monday, you need to take Tuesday off, you need to take Wednesday off, and then you can test again on Thursday. For that reason, when I'm dividing up test days for my clients, I really like to schedule the tests over 2 days in a week, not 3 or 4. All right. So usually what I'll do is squat and bench press, and then later on I'll do deadlift, and if the person wants to max out for overhead press, which a lot of people do, we'll do deadlift and overhead press together. You can also do squat and deadlift together and then bench and overhead press together. That works perfectly fine. Because you're only training 2 days and most people can train 3 or 4 days a week, I suggest that you give yourself a little bit of extra rest time, and you have a day in between where you're doing some type of light cardio, all right? So you're doing maybe 20 minutes of elliptical, stair stepper, I don't fucking care, walking, something, whatever. And maybe you do some abs and calves. You're just trying to move, you're doing some dynamic stretching, you're doing some mobility work, but it's really just to give you some extra rest without getting too detrained or too stiff or sore or whatever in between this week. You're not going to really get deep trained, but it can feel like, mentally, it can feel like you are a little bit. So you're just trying to stay loose, stay warm. And then you have your deadlift and or overhead press guy. Again, there's no one right way. If you want to schedule your things somewhat differently, that's perfectly fine. But again, I do recommend that you stick to this 2 days off after squat and deadlift. And with bench or overhead press, you can probably get away with 1 day a week. But if you want to schedule 3 days a week, go for it. Just try and follow this, right? So maybe you have squat, then you have rest day, bench press, rest day, deadlift, and you're still in your 7-day week, something like that. I hope this was helpful. If you guys have any questions, again, please leave them in the video. If you're watching this like a couple months later, I'm probably not going to go back and look at the comments, so just email me, okay? If you have questions, email me, ben@phdeadlift.com. There's links all over the place. Just find one, shoot me a message. I'll get back to you eventually, I promise. A couple other kind of housekeeping type of things. I do have a sale on my ebooks going on. The code is below, and you can follow the links. I'm using a new site called Gumroad, so if you've been having issues downloading books in the past, that will no longer be a problem. Gumroad actually has a really nice interface, so hopefully that's helpful to y'all. Be sure to check out the Iron Rebel and Granite sales that are on for Black Friday and Elite FTS. I'm going to be honest with y'all, Elite FTS is probably going to have a better deal on Cyber Monday, so you might want to wait for that. But they do have their Black Friday deals on sale on the website now. So thanks for watching. Again, ask questions. Hope this was helpful, and I'll see you next time.